Hey there, and welcome to Family Revenge. We're so glad you're here. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you can stay with us for every twist and turn. Let's jump right in. I stood outside the grand ballroom, hands shaking slightly as I adjusted my dress. The gleaming marble floors, towering floral arrangements, and the lavish chandelier above me screamed money, something I'd never felt comfortable with. A few deep breaths. I could do this. My name is Elra. I'm 32, and I work a government job. That's about as much as anyone in my family needs to know. Caleb's wedding, though. This was going to be something else. I stepped inside, the air filled with soft music and clinking glasses. The guests mingled in their designer suits, the women in dresses that probably cost as much as my car. Caleb's wedding wasn't just a celebration, it was a statement. It was perfect. Everything in place, everyone in their right spot. Hey, Elra! I heard a voice call out behind me. I turned, forcing a smile as my father strode over. His greeting was warm, but it didn't reach his eyes. Never did. I didn't fit into his world. At least not the way Caleb did. Hey, Dad, I said, my voice a little too soft as I hugged him. He patted me awkwardly on the back. No affection there. Then, without missing a beat, he waved over to a group of guests, his voice carrying. This is my daughter, Elra, he announced, his smile wide but empty. She works for the government. Doesn't have much to show for it, but, well, it's a job. I winced, the sting of his words sharper than I expected. Doesn't have much to show for it? I had to bite back a bitter laugh. If only he knew. But I didn't correct him. I didn't want to make a scene. I was, after all, just a side note in this little family story, not the star. Nice to meet you, I said to the guests, the polite mask firmly in place. As they smiled and nodded, I felt a familiar sense of invisibility wash over me. I was nothing more than a shadow in this world. Caleb's really done well for himself, my father continued, clapping me on the back. Look at him. Perfect job, beautiful wife, all the trimmings. You should be proud of your brother. I wanted to roll my eyes, but I kept them down. My father's pride in Caleb was like a weight on my chest, suffocating any pride I had in myself. Caleb had everything, the career, the lifestyle, the respect, and I was just Elra. The disappointment, but it wasn't worth it to argue. It never was. Instead, I took a deep breath, nodded, and forced another smile. I'm proud of him, I lied. I watched Caleb across the room, his broad smile radiating confidence as he laughed with some of the guests. They adored him, as they always did. I couldn't remember the last time I felt like I mattered in this family, and the feeling gnawed at me, bitter and familiar. Well, I'll let you get back to it, kiddo, my dad said, his eyes already scanning the room for someone else to impress. Enjoy the night. And with that, he walked off, already lost in his own world, leaving me standing alone amid a sea of people who barely knew I existed. The emptiness I'd been trying to ignore felt louder now. I chose to step aside, leaning against the wall, trying to hide in the shadows, as always. I wouldn't make a scene. But I sure felt invisible. The memory hit me like a punch to the gut. I was back in Colombia, deep in the heart of a drug cartel stronghold. It had been months since I'd stepped foot in a place like that. But the sounds, the smell of the humid air, it was all so vivid, like I was still there. It was late afternoon when we set up for the raid. My team, a tight-knit group of professionals, was already moving into position. The plan was flawless. No one would get hurt, no one would even see us coming. It was a precision operation, the kind I had led dozens of times. As I crouched low behind a wall, my radio buzzed in my ear. Clearance. Martinez's voice crackled through the static. I didn't need to check the monitor. I could feel it in my bones. Everything was in place. Go, I said, the word simple but heavy with the weight of everything that depended on it. We moved in, fast and quiet. Within minutes, the cartel's hideout was surrounded. We had intel that the leader was inside, along with a ton of cash and illegal weapons. Every detail had been accounted for. The raid went off without a hitch. Dozens were arrested, millions in assets seized. A perfect execution, no casualties. I felt the adrenaline, the rush, as the operation wrapped up. But as the team finished securing the perimeter, Martinez pulled me aside. Elra, he said, his face serious, you've been at this for months now, non-stop. You need to take a break. I stared at him, confused. Take a break? We had just dismantled one of the most powerful cartels in the region. And now, he was telling me to stop? I couldn't let my guard down. Not now. I'm good, Martinez, I replied, brushing him off. Just give me a few more days to clean up, and I'll be fine. But he wasn't having it. No, he said firmly. You've been working too hard. You're going home. I'm sending you to your family. I opened my mouth to protest, but he raised a hand. It's an order, Elra. You need a break. You're not going to be good to anyone if you don't take care of yourself first. I didn't want to go. The last place I wanted to be after an operation like this was back home, surrounded by the family who didn't understand what I did. I could already picture the uncomfortable silences, the forced small talk. They never got it, and I didn't expect them to. But I had no choice. Martinez was right. I had to go. Back home. I sat in the airport, the terminal buzzing with activity, but all I could think about was the mission, the rush, the focus, the clarity that came with every raid. It was the only place I felt like myself. The thought of going back to my family felt like a weight pressing down on my chest. I had nothing to say to them. They'd ask questions I couldn't answer, questions that would just make me feel even more distant. The way my dad would ask, "So, how's the government job?" Like it wasn't a real career, or how Caleb, the golden child, would talk about his perfect life, his wife, his career, his perfect little house, and I would just be me, Elra, the one who never fit in, the one who didn't matter. I dragged my suitcase behind me, the feeling of alienation still hanging thick in the air. It didn't matter how many cartels I took down or how many lives I saved. At home, I was just the screw-up who worked for the government. My phone buzzed. Martinez again. I smiled bitterly as I read the message. You're good, Elra. You're the best. Don't forget that. I couldn't help the knot in my stomach. No matter how many people in the field saw me as a leader, back home, it was like none of it mattered. I was never good enough. The plane ride was quiet. No one really knew who I was or what I did. To them, I was just another passenger on a flight. To my family, I was just Elra, the daughter, the sister, the one who never quite made it. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I knew Martinez was right. I needed to rest, even if it meant facing the family I could never live up to. I just hoped that this time, they'd see me, really see me, even if it was only for a moment. I stood by the drink table, feeling like an uninvited guest at my own family gathering. Caleb was at the center of it all, the golden child, shining as bright as the crystal chandeliers overhead. Guests clustered around him, laughing, nodding in admiration as he talked about his job, his new house, his perfect life. My father was at the front, of course, basking in the glow of Caleb's success. He clapped Caleb on the back, a proud grin plastered on his face. Look at him, my father said to the group. Perfect job, beautiful wife, everything a man could want. My son Caleb, the one who really made something of himself. I could already feel the familiar knot tightening in my stomach. Caleb, always the perfect one. And then there was me, standing in the background, blending into the wallpaper. My father's words stung like a slap, each one making me feel smaller, more insignificant. He turned to me, casually, as if it was no big deal. And this is Elra, my daughter, he said, his tone flat. She works for the government. Security, I think? Well, it's a job. A job. A job he never cared to understand, let alone respect. His words hung in the air like a weight, but I kept my mouth shut. It was easier this way. The last thing I wanted was to make a scene, to correct him, to remind him of everything I had done that none of them would ever understand. I looked around at the guests, smiling politely, nodding as they greeted me. They were too busy watching Caleb to notice me, and that was fine. I preferred it that way. But as I stood there, listening to my father boast about Caleb's accomplishments, my mind wandered back to the times I had tried to make them understand the work I did. The long nights, the sacrifices, the endless missions that kept me away. I had stopped trying a long time ago. No matter how many cartels I helped take down, how many lives I saved, it would never be enough for them. It was easier to be Caleb, to be the one they could show off, the one who fit into the image they had created for their family. I forced myself to smile and nod when someone asked how I was doing, but the tension inside me was palpable. How long had I been pretending? How long had I let them define who I was? The invisible woman who made things work for them but never got any recognition in return. I watched as my father's attention shifted back to Caleb, and the pride in his voice grew as he talked about his son's new promotion, his latest business ventures, and the new house he had just bought. It was always Caleb, the one who was always enough. I had spent so many years hiding who I really was, hoping that maybe, just maybe, they would see me. But here I was again, invisible in the same room as my perfect brother. I wanted to shout, to make them see how much I had given, but instead I stood there, silently watching the facade they had built around themselves. It was easier to stay silent, to let the image they had of me persist. What was the point of fighting it? After all these years, I knew it wouldn't matter. No matter what I did, no matter how hard I tried, I would always be the outsider, the one who didn't quite fit. I turned away from the crowd, my eyes scanning the room. Caleb was still the center of attention, and I was nothing more than a shadow in the background. A part of me wished it could be different, that I could be seen, that my life could matter to them in the same way Caleb's did. But I had long since given up on that dream. And so I stayed quiet, letting the silence in my heart grow louder. As I watched my family, the people who would never truly understand me, continue to worship Caleb's perfect life. The wedding was in full swing when I slipped away. The ballroom buzzed with laughter, the clinking of glasses, and the soft hum of a jazz band playing in the background. I was exhausted, even though I had barely moved all night. My mind kept replaying the conversation with my father, the dismissive tone, the casual mention of my government job, like it was some minor footnote in my life. I walked toward the hotel lobby, hoping for a moment of quiet. I needed to breathe, to process everything I was feeling: disappointment, anger, resignation. I reached for my phone and scrolled through a few emails, hoping to distract myself from the constant weight of family expectations. As I crossed the marble floor toward the bar, a CNN broadcast on the nearby TV caught my attention. I stopped for a moment, recognizing the unmistakable footage from the recent cartel operation we'd executed. The one I had led in Colombia. My heart skipped a beat. Breaking news tonight. The DEA has successfully dismantled one of the largest drug cartels in Latin America. Millions in assets seized, numerous arrests made, and a major blow to the cartel's operations. Leading the charge was Special Agent Elra, an officer who has been instrumental in the operation's success. Details of the operation are still emerging, but one thing is clear: Elra's leadership has earned her the respect of her colleagues and superiors. I froze, my name, my face, on national television. The footage flickered across the screen, images from the raid, the arrests, and there I was, standing in the middle of it all, my team behind me, coordinating the operation with precision. A part of me wanted to hide, to walk away before anyone recognized me, but I stood there, frozen, watching the details of the operation unfold in front of me. My phone buzzed, snapping me back to reality. It was Martinez. "Turn on the TV, Elra. You're on the news." I smiled bitterly. He didn't need to tell me. I had seen it for myself. I stood in silence for a few moments, letting the weight of it all sink in. The quiet recognition, the validation, it felt strange. Here, of all places, it was happening. My face, my work, being acknowledged. I wasn't invisible anymore. I wasn't just the black sheep of my family. A voice interrupted my thoughts. "Excuse me, are you Elra?" I turned to see a bartender looking at me curiously. A few other guests were glancing over now too, their gazes lingering. Recognition was spreading like wildfire, and I could feel it. Whispers began to rise in the air as more people realized who I was. I could hear bits of conversation as people checked their phones. "No way, that's her," one whispered. "She's the one leading the DEA raids?" another asked, disbelief in their voice. I felt exposed, not in a good way. I didn't want this attention. It wasn't about being seen, it was about the work, the job. But here it was, my truth coming out into the open, whether I was ready for it or not. I couldn't help but glance over at the wedding reception through the lobby doors. My father was still holding court in the ballroom, speaking proudly about Caleb, and in the midst of it all, I was finally being recognized, on a screen, by strangers, for the first time in my life. "Excuse me, Elra?" The bartender interrupted again, bringing me back to the moment. "Can I get you something?" I nodded quickly, trying to regain some composure. "Just water," I said, my voice betraying none of the turmoil inside me. I took a deep breath. I had done this work for years, battling cartels, chasing criminals, risking my life. But standing in that hotel lobby, as people gawked at me, I felt a sense of discomfort I hadn't expected. I wasn't used to this kind of attention. I wasn't used to being seen, not for what I had accomplished. My phone buzzed again, another message from Martinez. "Proud of you, Elra. You've earned this moment. Enjoy it." I stared at the words for a long moment, unsure of what to feel. Was I enjoying this? Did I even want this recognition? But I wasn't just Elra anymore. The person my family always dismissed, the one they thought would always stay in the background, was now something else. Someone who had made a real difference. And that difference, for once, was clear to everyone else. The buzz in the air was palpable. I could feel the weight of it as soon as I re entered the ballroom. The soft clinking of glasses, the quiet hum of conversations, but there was something different now. Something had shifted. I tried to slip back into the shadows, but it was impossible to ignore the subtle glances that followed me, the whispers in the air. People were beginning to notice. At first, it was just a few, here and there, an inquisitive look, a hushed comment, a sudden awareness. Then it spread like wildfire. I walked past a group of guests who had been laughing at Caleb's joke a moment ago. Now their eyes lingered on me, and I could hear snippets of their conversation. Wait, isn't that Elra? The one on the news? Someone asked, disbelief in their voice. Yeah, she's the DEA agent, right? Another person said, quieter now. I didn't even know she did that kind of work. I clenched my jaw, keeping my face neutral. It wasn't the attention I wanted. Not like this. I didn't want to be recognized because of some headline. It wasn't supposed to matter, but it did. I saw Aunt Lydia a few steps away, her eyes widening when she caught sight of me. She approached, her smile forced but polite. Oh, Elra, I saw you on the news, she said, her voice almost too chipper. That's sweet, I guess. The DEA, right? How nice. Nice. The word hit me like a slap, but I swallowed it down. I was used to her condescending tone by now. She had never truly seen the work I did. To her, it would always be something sweet or charming, never real or important. Yeah, that's me, I said, my voice calm despite the frustration bubbling inside. It's not much, really. Lydia's smile tightened, like she didn't know what to say next. I suppose it's good that you're keeping busy. She looked around, suddenly uncomfortable, then quickly shifted the conversation to something else. Anything to avoid talking about the weight of what had just been acknowledged. I turned away, but the shift in the room's energy was impossible to ignore. The recognition wasn't just a quiet ripple anymore. It was becoming a wave, making its way through the crowd, reaching more and more people. They were aware of me now. They were aware of my work, but it was still so detached from the way they viewed Caleb's success. I looked across the room and saw my father standing by Caleb, his pride glowing brighter than the crystal chandeliers above us. His voice carried across the room as he spoke of Caleb's accomplishments in glowing terms, his lucrative job, his perfect life. And here I was, the underachiever, still relegated to the background. A familiar emptiness settled in the pit of my stomach. He didn't notice the stir around me, didn't notice the subtle shift in how the guests were looking at me now. His pride in Caleb continued to grow as the guests nodded and smiled at Caleb's successes, oblivious to the quiet truth now unfolding in the background. I couldn't listen to it anymore. It was like a physical weight, pushing down on me, every word Caleb's name carrying a little more weight than mine ever could. I took a moment to step outside into the cool night air, needing space. I stared at my phone as I walked, ignoring the rising tension in my chest. The messages had started flooding in. Texts from colleagues, mentors, people who were congratulating me on my high-profile role. From all the corners of my professional world, the recognition was there. But back inside, it was still Caleb who was the hero, the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. I didn't want to care, but it gnawed at me, the contrast between how my family saw me and how the world was starting to. The two realities felt too far apart. After a few minutes of fresh air, I returned to the ballroom, but the weight of it all, my father's ongoing speech about Caleb's achievements, and the whispers that followed me, became almost unbearable. It was all too clear. No matter what I had done, no matter how many lives I'd saved, I was still the outsider in my own family. I could hear my father in the distance, his voice rising in pride as he continued. Caleb is the perfect son. He's got everything figured out. A great job, a beautiful wife. He's got it all. I exhaled slowly, forcing myself to take one step forward. This was my moment. I could let it slide or I could take a stand. And yet, the longer I stood there, the more it sank in. For once, maybe I deserved to be seen. I wasn't just the girl from the government. I wasn't just the daughter or the sister. I had earned this. And it was time my family finally understood that. I stepped back into the ballroom, the noise from the crowd washing over me like a distant wave. The tension in the air was thick now. People were whispering, pointing, but none of it mattered. Not anymore. I glanced over at my father standing with Caleb, proudly clapping him on the back as he spoke. His voice was so loud, so boisterous, talking about his son's latest promotion and the new business venture he had undertaken. I could see the pride on my father's face, his golden boy, the perfect son, the one who could do no wrong. I couldn't listen to it anymore. My breath caught in my chest as I approached. Every word my father said about Caleb seemed to twist the knife deeper into the wound I'd been carrying all my life. I had sacrificed so much, done things none of them could ever imagine, and yet Caleb was always the one in the spotlight, the one who made my father proud. My feet moved on their own, carrying me to the center of the room, directly to where my father was holding court. His voice was still carrying across the room, but when I reached him, the words faltered. The space between us felt suddenly larger than it had before. My father's eyes met mine, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. He hadn't expected me to speak up. He didn't expect this from me. "Dad," I said, my voice steady, but louder than I intended. The room fell quiet just for a moment. He blinked, taken aback. "Elra, what—" "Excuse me," I interrupted, calmly but firmly. I stepped forward, standing tall for the first time in what felt like forever. The room's energy shifted, the whispers still buzzing around us as all eyes turned to me. The faintest ripple of recognition passed through the crowd. I wasn't just some quiet background figure anymore. "Let me correct something," I continued, my gaze fixed on my father. I wasn't looking at him for approval anymore. I didn't need his validation. "You're right about Caleb. He's done well. He's got a great job. He's built a life that people admire." I let that sink in, my voice quiet but unyielding. "But you've completely missed the truth about me." I paused, the silence of the room pressing in on me. The weight of years of unsaid things, of buried sacrifices, hung heavily in the air. I could see the uncomfortable shifting of guests, some still unsure of what was happening, others finally beginning to pay attention. It was now or never. "I'm not just the government worker you've always dismissed," I said, each word carefully measured. "I led the operation that took down a cartel that's been a threat to millions of lives. I've been to places you can't even imagine. I've put myself in danger to protect people I'll never meet. I've worked tirelessly, years, with no recognition beyond the walls of my agency." I let the words settle. I could see my father's face falter, his mouth opening slightly, but no sound coming out. He didn't know what to say. He never had to understand before. He never had to. I glanced over at Caleb, his smile frozen on his face as he watched me. The guests were staring now, murmuring, checking their phones. The news, the story, everything was unraveling in real time. "My name isn't just a footnote in the background of Caleb's life," I continued, my voice steady, clear. "I'm Elra, and I'm proud of what I've done, of what I've given, and I'm done being overlooked." The room was silent, except for the soft click of phones as people tried to process the information. I could hear the disbelief in the murmurs, the shock in their voices as they began to check the details on their phones, confirming the news reports. They were finally seeing me, not as the invisible sister or the daughter who never quite fit in, but as someone who had accomplished something real. My father stood there, stunned, caught between the image he had built of me and the truth that had just been revealed. His pride in Caleb, his constant boasting, faltered. He had no words. I nodded at him, not waiting for a response. There was nothing more to say. For once, I wasn't here to seek his approval. I turned to Caleb, meeting his gaze. He was still processing, still in shock, but there was something different in his eyes now. I didn't expect anything from him. He had lived in his bubble for so long, I doubted he fully grasped the weight of the moment. "Congrats on the wedding, Caleb," I said, my voice calm but warm. I wasn't angry. I wasn't upset. I was simply free. "I'm happy for you." Then, without waiting for any more words, I stepped away from the center of attention. The room was still. The silence was almost deafening, but I felt a quiet strength in it, the power of finally speaking my truth. I walked out of the ballroom, my footsteps echoing in the hollow silence. It wasn't their approval I was after anymore. I didn't need to be validated by their image of me. I had found my voice, and that was enough. The ballroom fell silent after my words. The hum of laughter, the clinking of glasses, all came to a sudden halt as everyone turned toward me. My father's face was frozen, caught in a moment where his pride collided with the truth I had just shared. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. It was as if he was too stunned to speak. I could hear the soft murmurs begin, guests whispering among themselves, eyes shifting between me and my father. The whispers grew louder, and I could see the flicker of recognition in their faces. They were checking their phones, their gazes shifting back to me as the news of my role in the cartel raid spread like wildfire. The world my family had built for me was crumbling before their eyes. Caleb's world, so perfectly polished, was slipping. For the first time, my accomplishments, my real accomplishments, were in the spotlight, not as a footnote or a side note in Caleb's story. My father stood frozen, his pride tangled with confusion, unable to respond. I watched him, but there was no satisfaction in it. There was no joy in finally being seen. I had spoken the truth because I had to, not for applause or recognition, but for me. I could feel the energy in the room shift as more people began to grasp the weight of what I had said. Guests were pulling up articles on their phones, confirming what I had just revealed. The news story, the footage from the raid, the millions in assets seized. My name was everywhere. But my father? He remained paralyzed by his own pride, his self-image as the father of a successful son. His gaze fell to the ground, unable to meet mine. He couldn't reconcile the truth with the image he had always held. I glanced over at Caleb, who was still processing the moment. He stood there, his smile frozen on his face, unsure of how to react. I wasn't expecting him to understand. He never did. And honestly, I didn't need him to. This was my moment. I took a deep breath and walked over to him. His eyes met mine, and for the briefest moment, I saw something. Confusion, maybe guilt. But I wasn't here for him. Not anymore. I didn't need to explain myself to him. "Congrats on your wedding, Caleb," I said, my voice calm but sincere. "I'm happy for you." He nodded, his lips slightly parted as though he wanted to say something. But it didn't matter. I wasn't there for him. I wasn't there for anyone but myself. And with that, I stepped away from the center of attention. I didn't look back as I walked toward the exit. The room had gone still. My father was still processing. My family, the guests, the ones who had never understood me, they were the ones who would have to reconcile with the truth. I was no longer the black sheep, the outsider. I had claimed my voice. The silence behind me was almost deafening as I left the ballroom, but I didn't feel the weight of it anymore. I felt free. I stepped outside the hotel, the cool evening air hitting my face like a rush of freedom. The noise of the wedding was distant now, a muffled buzz behind me. For the first time in a long time, I felt unburdened. I leaned against the brick wall, taking a deep breath. The weight of the night had finally lifted. No longer would I carry the silent frustration of being invisible, of living in the shadow of Caleb's perfect life. I wasn't going to wait for anyone's approval anymore. I pulled out my phone and saw a flood of messages. Most of them were from colleagues, mentors, and people who had been watching the news. They were congratulating me, acknowledging my work. A few from my team, expressing pride. But there was one message that made my heart skip. "Martinez, you did it, Elra. The president wants to meet with you." I smiled, the validation I had sought for years suddenly feeling so much smaller than I had imagined. It wasn't about the attention. It wasn't about the recognition. It was the fact that my truth, my real work, was finally out there. My voice had been heard. And in that moment, that was enough. The buzzing of my phone continued, but I let it ring, checking through the messages at my own pace. This wasn't the same as before, when I'd respond immediately to anyone who needed something from me. This time, I was in control. The world had been spinning on its axis for so long, and I was simply riding the wave, free from the gravity of expectations. I took another deep breath and smiled to myself. The moment I'd feared for so long had arrived. The truth was out, and there was no going back. I had shared the real me with the world, and now the world could finally see it. For the first time, I felt at peace with it all. I slid into my car and turned the key. The engine hummed to life. As I pulled away from the hotel, leaving the glittering lights of the wedding and the suffocating weight of my family's expectations behind me, I felt a quiet triumph. The road stretched out ahead of me, empty and endless, just like my future. And for once, it was mine to define. I checked my phone one last time, seeing another message from Martinez. He'd sent a follow-up, a simple, "You earned this, Elra. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." I smiled at the message, feeling the weight of years of sacrifice, silence, and the work I had done. finally speaking for itself. I drove into the night, feeling the freedom that had eluded me for so long. For the first time in years, I was no longer defined by anyone else's expectations. I was free, free to be myself, free to build the future I had always wanted. The engine hummed steadily beneath me as I drove down the winding roads, leaving the glittering lights of the wedding and the weight of my family's expectations behind. The night was quiet, the only sound the tires meeting the asphalt, a rhythmic companion to my thoughts. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the gnawing discomfort that had haunted me for as long as I could remember. I didn't feel the pull of approval from my father, or the need to prove myself to Caleb. The silence in the car was my own. No more expectations, no more false narratives. Just me. Finally. Fully. Me. I glanced at my phone, seeing another flurry of missed messages. They were still pouring in. Messages of congratulations, some from colleagues I hadn't spoken to in months, others from mentors who had seen the news and were reaching out. Martinez had sent a brief text, letting me know the president wanted to meet. "You've earned this moment, Elra. Let's keep pushing forward." I smiled at his words. For once, I didn't need anyone else to validate me. The recognition, the attention, it wasn't what mattered anymore. What mattered was that I finally saw myself, fully and without apology. I was not the daughter who had always been overshadowed. I wasn't just the sister in Caleb's shadow. I was the woman who had built her own identity, one she could stand proud of, even if my family would never fully understand. The road stretched ahead of me, the familiar landscape passing in a blur. I thought about the years I'd spent suppressing my own truth, thinking that my worth was tied to how others saw me. I thought about the sacrifices, my sacrifices, that had gone unnoticed. All the years of silence, of watching my family bask in Caleb's light while I played the role of the invisible one. But not anymore. No more silence, no more hiding. I had made peace with the fact that my family would never see me the way I wanted them to. They would always hold up Caleb as the perfect example, the one who followed the right path. But that didn't make me any less. I wasn't an afterthought or a mistake. I was Elra, and that was more than enough. As I drove into the night, I felt a quiet sense of satisfaction. The weight of years of sacrifice, silence, and the work that had always spoken for itself had lifted. I was free. Free from the expectations they had placed on me. Free from the need to justify my choices. For the first time, I could look ahead without carrying the burden of their disapproval. I checked my rearview mirror and saw the faint glow of the hotel lights fading in the distance. I didn't look back. I answered the final text from Martinez, confirming the meeting with the president. It wasn't about seeking their approval anymore. It was about embracing the path I had carved for myself, on my terms. The moment I hit send on my reply, I felt something inside me shift. It was the quiet triumph of knowing my voice had been heard, not just by the world, but by me. With each passing mile, I left behind the version of myself my family had tried to force upon me. I was no longer just a product of their expectations. I was Elra, and I was ready to step into the next chapter of my life, unburdened by their shadows.